Imagine a colossal vessel, the size of an oil tanker, crammed from bow to stern with firearms, 7 seconds ammunition, and defensive gear, anchored 38 miles off the shore of one of America's closest Gulf allies. Wouldn't common sense dictate posting a proper security detail, more than a single person casually scrolling on deck? Yet that precaution was apparently overlooked. On May 14, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy did not simply pass by. They boarded the MV Orshan, a Honduras-flagged Chinese-operated floating armory, seized it, and pulled it toward Iranian territorial waters in broad daylight, all while the U.S. and Chinese presidents were sitting across from each other in Beijing, agreeing that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open. Let that sink in. This was not hypothetical, not a drill, not a simulation. This was reality. Here's what we need to understand. The MV Orshan, sometimes reported as Hoichan, was flagged in Honduras but operated by a Chinese firm. It served as a floating armory, a concept familiar to maritime security circles. Floating armories act as storage and transfer points for weapons in international waters, typically beyond the 12 nautical mile limit of any nation. Commercial shipping companies navigating high-risk zones like the Gulf of Aden or the Persian Gulf avoid carrying weapons directly into port because of strict local regulations. Instead, they hire maritime security firms. These teams board the armory at the edge of danger zones, transport the weapons aboard commercial vessels for transit, and return them afterward. The system is legal, practical, and has functioned reliably for years, particularly since the spike in Somali piracy between 2008 and 2012. Until May 14th, 2026, that is, when the system itself became the target of seizure by the most heavily armed actors in the region. According to the UK Maritime Trade Operations, which tracks maritime security incidents in the Gulf, the vessel was anchored roughly 38 nautical miles northeast of Fujairah. For context, Fujairah is the UAE's primary eastern oil export hub, deliberately bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. Strategically, it is a lifeline and one of the closest points to America's influence in the Gulf. This was not a neutral maritime probe. Iran approached a critical ally's doorstep and seized a fully armed vessel. The timing is crucial. On that same day, President Trump was in Beijing for what the media has termed the Trump-Xi Summit. Summit readouts contain 2 explicit agreements. First, the Strait of Hormuz must remain unobstructed for global energy flow. Second, Iran must never acquire nuclear weapons. Trump even told reporters that Xi had personally promised not to supply Iran with military equipment, a statement Trump described as significant. Yet within hours, the IRGC Navy had boarded a Chinese-operated vessel, taking control of a floating armory. Coincidence? Hardly. This was no random commercial ship flying a convenient flag. It was run by a Chinese maritime security firm. The weapons aboard were intended to protect commercial shipping through corridors vital to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Viewed plainly, China had one of its own security assets seized by the IRGC. If the summit notes and personal assurances to Trump were credible, Beijing should be outraged, filing formal protests, and demanding the vessel's return. Yet, as of the morning of May 15, 2026, China's public response was unusually restrained, measured, and notably absent of the sharp language expected from a nation whose maritime asset was pirated. That silence is telling. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed the summit's outcomes directly, emphasizing that Washington would not support an Iranian toll system in the strait and does not recognize Iran's right to place mines in international waters. But the statement that captured attention was this: the United States does not require China's assistance. In other words, Washington acknowledged a moment of alignment with Beijing while making it clear that courtesy does not equate to dependence. Iran, meanwhile, is under immense economic pressure. Credible reports, including analyses by Reuters and the Institute for the Study of War, estimate that the nation has been losing roughly $500 million per day since the escalation in the strait. The Iranian currency has been in freefall, and its proxy networks, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi militia factions, have been systematically weakened over the past 18 months. Their air defenses have been heavily degraded, and conventional military hardware, particularly precision munitions, is depleting faster than domestic production can replenish. In this context, the seizure of the floating armory was not just opportunistic, it was strategic. The timing was brilliant in a darkly creative way. The IRGC Navy acquired small arms, RPGs, shoulder-fired weapons, possibly mines, and perhaps even more advanced materiel from a floating armory located 38 miles off Fujairah, at a moment when global media attention was focused on the Beijing summit. Whether Iran had guidance in locating the vessel remains a critical question. Public statements from Iran since the seizure reveal a regime escalating both rhetoric and posture, signaling preparation for an extended conflict rather than negotiation. Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, who also serves as chief negotiator in nuclear discussions, a peculiar combination, posted on social media that Iranian forces are prepared to respond decisively to any aggression. Coming from a former IRGC Air Force commander within 24 hours of the MV Awarshan seizure, the timing of this message is highly significant. It reflects a coordinated voice across Iran's military and political structures. More concerning is the IRGC's characterization of the Strait of Hormuz itself. Officials have explicitly described the waterway as Iran's nuclear weapon. This is not casual language. It's deliberate, intended to convey to Washington, Beijing, Riyadh, and energy-dependent nations worldwide that Iran does not require a nuclear warhead to exert leverage. The strait, 21 miles wide and carrying roughly 20% of global traded oil, functions as a potent strategic choke point. Threats to its flow trigger oil price spikes with ripple effects across every major economy. Iran has relied on this deterrent since the 1980s tanker war, but now they are openly communicating it while demonstrating willingness to act inside ostensibly secure corridors. The nuclear dimension amplifies the threat. According to the latest IAEA reporting, Iran has stockpiled approximately 408 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium is 90%, but the technical leap from 60 to 90% is significantly shorter and faster than the path from lower enrichment levels to 60%. The hardest work is already complete. In sum, May 14, 2026 was a turning point. The seizure of the MV Awarshan exposed vulnerabilities in maritime security, demonstrated Iran's strategic boldness, and revealed how geopolitics, timing, and military opportunism can converge in a single audacious act. The implications reverberate not only for U.S. interests and allies in the Gulf, but for global energy stability and strategic calculations across continents. The question now is not just what Iran has taken, but how the United States and its partners will respond to this deliberate, high-stakes challenge. Multiple non-proliferation specialists, cited in Arms Control Today and Reuters analyses, have calculated that Iran's current uranium stockpile, if the decision were made to enrich it to 90%, could theoretically yield sufficient fissile material for a single nuclear device within a matter of weeks, not months, weeks. That is the tangible leverage currently on the negotiation table. The stakes could not be clearer. Iran's present negotiating stance, as conveyed through Pakistan, a topic that only grows more awkward, has been characterized by the Trump administration as completely unacceptable. President Trump publicly used that precise wording, and he even added the word stupid, a blunt signal revealing how thin Washington's patience has grown with Tehran's current counteroffer. According to multiple reports, including Al Jazeera and Gulf News, Iran's proposal involves a 5-year moratorium framework, essentially pausing enrichment activity on paper while leaving the entire nuclear infrastructure untouched. No dismantlement, no destruction of centrifuges, no verifiable reduction of stockpiles. Just a diplomatic timeout. After 5 years, or whenever political winds shift, they resume exactly where they left off, this time with 5 additional years of covert development baked in. The Trump administration assessed this proposal for what it truly is, a stalling tactic, both costly and dangerously deceptive. Pakistan's role demands attention because it keeps emerging in coverage, yet remains underemphasized. Islamabad has functioned as the primary intermediary in these ceasefire discussions. On April 8, 2026, a ceasefire framework was brokered, partially through Pakistani diplomatic channels. But the term ceasefire is generous. Maritime incidents have continued since the announcement. U.S. officials have described that framework as being on massive life support. Here is the critical detail largely overlooked. Credible reports and regional security publications indicate that Pakistani airfields have hosted Iranian surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft. In other words, Iranian spy planes operate from Pakistani territory, even while Islamabad mediates peace talks between Iran and the United States. Structurally, this is significant. A mediator enabling one party to conduct intelligence operations against the other is not neutral. It is something far more complex. Washington's patience with this arrangement is wearing thin, paralleling frustration with Tehran's nuclear stalling. The strategic thread tying these developments together is clear. Iran is not negotiating to reach an immediate deal. Tehran is negotiating to endure long enough to render a deal unnecessary. Each delayed counteroffer, each seized vessel, every aggressive public declaration equating the Strait of Hormuz to their nuclear weapon is part of a deliberate strategy. Iran aims to outlast U.S. attention, fragment coalition unity, and maintain control over the strait as a permanent leverage point. The goal is to wear out Washington, fracture allies, and create oil market disruptions sufficient to produce a pathway that preserves everything Iran seeks. The seizure of the floating armory fits this blueprint perfectly. Every weapon added to the IRGC Navy inventory, RPGs, heavy machine guns, possibly advanced seekers obtained from the Chinese-operated vessel, enhances their capacity to harass, threaten, and occasionally close the strait. It extends the pressure campaign, prolongs leverage, and simultaneously gives Beijing plausible deniability while forcing Washington to react rather than set the tempo. However, reacting does not mean helplessness. In fact, the U.S. response can be overwhelming, precisely calibrated and publicly demonstrated to alter the entire strategic equation. The U.S. military has been preparing that response and has already begun deploying it. The assets positioned in the region should make any IRGC fast attack boat captain very uncomfortable. This brings us to what the U.S. military has actually done, what they have publicly testified they are ready to execute, and what is physically in theater awaiting orders. Mainstream coverage frequently downplays this dimension. Diplomatic headlines and Iranian rhetoric dominate the narrative, yet the underlying hardware and operational posture in the Persian Gulf tell a different story, one of methodical, professional preparation for a specific type of conflict. Not a superpower, scrambling reactively. Congressional testimony offers transparency that deserves far more attention. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of U.S. Central Command, appeared before Congress to outline the U.S. military's capabilities and stance in the Gulf. His testimony described not a reactive force, but a pre-positioned, multi-domain strike architecture designed to counter precisely the low-tech, high-volume threat posed by the IRGC Navy. Admiral Cooper confirmed that U.S. forces have already executed offensive operations against Iranian naval assets and possess the positioning and capability to significantly degrade Iran's fast attack craft fleet, the so-called Mosquito Fleet, quickly and at scale. He emphasized that existing rules of engagement, combined with the current threat environment, provide U.S. commanders substantial operational flexibility to respond to provocations like the MV Aurchan seizure. His testimony was a deliberate public signal to Tehran that Washington's patience has both a limit and tangible consequences. Understanding the Mosquito Fleet itself is essential. The IRGC Navy Fast Attack Craft Force, which executed the MV Aurchan boarding, relies on speed, swarm tactics, and asymmetric harassment. These are not conventional warships. They are small, fast, highly maneuverable craft, typically 10 to 15 meters in length, capable of exceeding 50 knots in some configurations. Standard armament includes 12.7mm heavy machine guns, while larger variants carry anti-ship cruise missiles. The NOR missile, an Iranian reverse-engineered derivative of the Chinese C-82, reaches roughly 120 kilometers with a 165-kilogram warhead. Some configurations carry rocket-propelled grenade launchers and man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, shoulder-fired missiles capable of engaging low-flying aircraft. Defense analysts, including those cited by U.S. Naval Institute News and The Aviationist, estimate the total IRGC fast attack craft numbers between several hundred and potentially over 1,000 when including all variants and reserve assets. This is not a fleet, it is a swarm, and swarms require a very specific counter. Enter the A-10 Thunderbolt II. For years, the Pentagon and Congress have debated retiring this platform, yet in the Persian Gulf, its relevance is undeniable. The Air Force aimed to phase it out in favor of modern multi-role aircraft, but congressional intervention preserved it. The A-10 was purpose-built for precisely this kind of conflict: low altitude, high density, close support against numerous fast-moving targets in cluttered maritime environments, not the high-end contested airspace scenarios envisioned for the F-35 and F-22. Currently, dozens of A-10s are deployed or within rapid deployment range of the Persian Gulf. The A-10's lethality stems from its GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, firing 30mm rounds at approximately 3,900 rounds per minute in high-rate mode. In high explosive incendiary configuration, each round combines kinetic penetration with explosive fragmentation. Against a lightly armored fiberglass fast attack craft moving at 50 knots, a 2-second burst from the GAU-8 is not a warning, it is a mission kill. Beyond the cannon, the A-10 can carry AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missiles, Mk-82 general-purpose bombs, and rocket pods, enabling engagement of multiple targets across a wide maritime area in a single sortie. Crews train extensively for maritime strike scenarios, making the aircraft's nickname Boatbuster more than apt. But the A-10 is not the only asset shaping the U.S. posture. The AC-130J Ghost Rider, often overlooked, represents a formidable complement. A heavily modified C-130 transport, the AC-130J serves as a precision fire support platform equipped with a 30mm Bushmaster cannon, a 105mm M102 howitzer, and the ability to deploy precision-guided munitions, including Griffin missiles and GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. Operating primarily at night with advanced electro-optical and infrared sensors, it can identify, track, and strike targets with extraordinary precision. Perfect for fast attack craft in the Persian Gulf, precisely the conditions the IRGC favors. By the time the AC-130J is detected, its munitions have already neutralized threats permanently. Beyond these platforms, the broader U.S. force in the Middle East as of May 2026 includes at least one carrier strike group, multiple guided missile destroyers and cruisers equipped with Tomahawk strike capability, MH-60 Seahawk helicopters configured for maritime interdiction, and P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft conducting persistent surveillance across critical Gulf choke points. The P-8, a militarized Boeing 737, is equipped with sensors, sonar, and anti-surface weapons capable of simultaneously tracking surface vessels, submarines across a vast maritime domain. In a region where the IRGC attempts to deploy swarming fast attack boats, constant P-8 surveillance ensures nearly every maneuver is visible, tracked, and potentially engaged before reaching any target. Adding to that, Army AH-64 Apache attack helicopters have been discreetly stationed at forward bases across the Gulf. Equipped with Hellfire missiles guided by lasers, designed to penetrate armored targets, and a 30mm Semi-230 chain gun, the Apache's firepower against a single IRGC fast attack vessel is overwhelming. When faced with a coordinated swarm, a formation of Apaches loaded with full Hellfire complements becomes a tactical game-changer, multiplying force effectiveness. The IRGC understands this, which likely influenced the nature of the Our Chan seizure, a silent night operation against an apparently undefended ship rather than a bold confrontation with U.S. forces. Operationally, Iranian military planners must reckon with the stark reality the U.S. military in the theater is not just capable of defeating the Mosquito fleet, it can do so rapidly, decisively, and in a way that leaves almost no vessels operational afterward. The IRGC fast attack units excel in harassment, intimidation, and opportunistic captures. But they are not a credible threat in a sustained engagement against concentrated American air and naval firepower and precision strike capabilities. Both sides understand this calculus, explaining why Iran consistently operates in the gray zone, too provocative for normal commerce, yet below the threshold that triggers a direct U.S. military response. The Our Chan seizure typifies this approach, audacious, carefully timed, and engineered to remain just under the level provoking kinetic retaliation. Today, on May 15, 2026, the IRGC Navy captured a Chinese-operated floating armory roughly 38 miles off the UAE coast. Despite public declarations from the Trump Sea Summit, Iran wasted no time testing the limits of any agreements. Rhetoric has surged to the highest aggression levels witnessed in this conflict, while a fully integrated U.S. multi-platform strike network remains pre-positioned in the region. The stakes extend beyond a single captured vessel. They signify Iran's operational trajectory and foreshadow developments in the Strait of Hormuz, nuclear negotiations, and the broader regional order over the next 30 to 60 days. Consider the floating armory itself. While a full inventory is still unconfirmed, UKMTO validation and maritime security reporting provide insight. Floating armories in this area typically carry standardized defensive gear for commercial ship protection. Semi-automatic rifles, non-lethal deterrents, long-range acoustic devices, water cannons, and razor wire kits. Yet, high-tier contracts servicing the riskiest maritime corridors often stock heavier weaponry. Rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns in the 12.7mm to 14.5mm range, and occasionally more advanced defensive systems. The exact loadout aboard the Our Chan remains uncertain, but the IRGC would not have executed a deep-water boarding mission during a U.S.-China summit for something trivial. Their target reflected actionable intelligence. This brings China into the discussion. To be precise, there is no evidence Beijing directly ordered the seizure. No phone call from Xi Jinping to IRGC command occurred. However, China possesses both the capability and incentive to ensure accurate intelligence reached Iranian operators. Chinese shipping companies, port operators, and maritime security contractors maintain extensive oversight of vessel positions, cargo manifests, and anchorage patterns throughout the Gulf. A Chinese-operated armory stationed 38 miles northeast of Ifgera would have its coordinates logged, accessible to parties with the right maritime relationships. A direct command isn't necessary. Sharing precise location data is sufficient to produce a strategic advantage. From Beijing's perspective, this approach makes sense. China's interests are nuanced and sometimes contradictory. On one side, the Strait of Hormuz must remain open for its energy imports. Approximately 40% of China's crude oil passes through these waters. A permanently closed strait would damage Chinese supply lines as much as anyone else's, incentivizing eventual regional stability. On the other hand, China does not benefit from the United States emerging as the crisis resolver. A successful U.S. intervention would enhance American global credibility, reinforce coalition ties, neutralize Iran's nuclear ambitions, and secure maritime freedom, positioning Washington as a more formidable counterweight to Beijing's long-term strategic objectives, including Taiwan. Therefore, Beijing's ideal scenario is a protracted, unresolved conflict that strains U.S. focus and resources without producing a decisive outcome. A timed floating armory seizure that replenishes the IRGC Navy while affording Beijing plausible deniability fits this strategy perfectly. 3 factors now have the potential to shift the conflict's trajectory over the next 30 to 60 days, and all are actively in play. First, the nuclear negotiation timeline is critical. The Trump administration's diplomatic patience is finite, with multiple channels, including Pakistani and Omani intermediaries, operating simultaneously. Should Iran's forthcoming counteroffer again fail to meet U.S. expectations, the window for a negotiated nuclear freeze narrows quickly. With stockpiles at 60% enrichment and 408 kilograms of material, every passing week moves the region closer to a threshold that alters military planning. The recent weapon seizure, rather than serious compromise, signals Iran's calculated direction. Second, the next IRGC naval provocation is inevitable. The Aurchan seizure will not be the last act of maritime assertiveness. The pivotal question is whether the next incident crosses the line into direct engagement with U.S. assets. Congressional testimony from Admiral Cooper confirms that American forces have both the authority and the disposition to respond kinetically to provocations meeting specific criteria. If U.S. crews are involved or IRGC craft directly confront naval units, gray zone management shifts to active armed conflict almost instantly. At that moment, the A-10s, AC-130Js, and Apache helicopters are no longer in standby. They act. Even Iran's bold Mosquito fleet cannot endure sustained engagements against concentrated American firepower in confined maritime spaces. The third determinant concerns coalition unity. Gulf security architecture is evolving rapidly. UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain have deepened coordination with U.S. forces compared to a year ago. Diplomatic frameworks, initially for Israeli normalization, have been quietly adapted to enhance regional security cooperation. If the coalition remains cohesive, united in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and resisting Iranian coercion, Iran's leverage diminishes. The nuclear weapon of the Strait concept relies on the perception of fear. A strong, consolidated Gulf coalition backed by American capability removes that fear. Adversaries whose threats lose deterrent effect face unavoidable strategic choices. In my assessment as of May 15, 2026, Iran is not achieving strategic success, despite today's tactical headlines suggesting otherwise. Capturing a floating armory is a temporary tactical gain, replenishing IRGC supplies, but it signals to the United States, Gulf partners, and the global energy-dependent audience that Iran will act aggressively even amid active superpower diplomacy. Each IRGC maneuver strengthens the case for enduring American military presence, precisely countering the leverage Iran seeks to maintain. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.